Hello, my name is Axel Magnuson. I'm with the KBN Climate Coalition, and today we're here to see a video and have a panel discussion about the work of Elaine MacGray Starrett, who passed away recently. But before she did, she left us some beautiful paintings of what's been happening on Cape Ann over the great number of years. I'd like to start with one little thing, which is a quote from a Gloucester author, Joanne Hart, that was done as part of a Here Comes the Sun cabaret performance a couple of years ago. She said, all art, whether drama, music, or literature, helps us to comprehend the incomprehensible. Climate change is particularly hard for people to grasp because it's all about invisible gases, and there are multiple models of its effects, none of which are good. The art helps us to imagine a future that can turn that around. And I would like to add to that, to act to turn it around. So today we're going to see the premiere of a film, an interview with Elaine MacGray Starrett, and what she did, what act she performed. In this case 8 acts.
She understood that.
And this is Elaine and her effort to change how people thought about the environment on Cape Ann. So this event will end at 6 o'clock, at least the formal part of it. And after that, we will have another half hour for people to interact with each other in breakout groups, and where you can actually talk to each other and begin to actually come up with ideas and plans to act. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to the interviewer and videographer for this event, Lisa Smith, who has been a very important part of this and putting this event together. So Lisa.
Hi, everybody. My name's Lisa Smith. I'm a member of the KBN Climate Coalition, and as a filmmaker of sorts, I make videos for the KBN Climate Coalition as a volunteer for a series called Everything We Do Matters. And in this series, it's about people who live on Cape Ann who are doing things, are taking action on the climate. And they're little short videos, and they're supposed to inspire people to take action on the climate. So Susan Kreitman, who's in the climate arts group, asked me if I could make a video on a Rockport artist, Elaine MacGray Starrett. I had no idea who she was. She sent over some audio recordings of Elaine and photos of her artwork, and I really liked what I saw and what I heard. So I went over to her house and recorded her 2 days, and also a friend of mine who does video came over and helped me out, Jim Capillo. So we recorded what she had to say. I really liked her a lot. I felt like she was a kindred spirit, someone who was really concerned about the environment and what we're doing to it. And even though she was in her 90s, she had a real youthfulness to her. And so I thought I'd see her afterwards. With COVID, I wasn't expecting to see her after I shot it in the fall, but she passed away. But before she passed away, she did see the edited version of the video, and I was really happy because she liked it, and she was the one person I was concerned about liking it, because I had a lot of respect for her and the message that she sends about how we really need to think about our actions on the environment. And so anyways, I hope this video that you see inspires you to go out and create and inspire other people to take action on the climate.
Thanks, Lisa. And now Susan Kreitman is the lead conspirator in this event, and she has a few words to say as well.
Hello, everybody. We want to welcome you to our Climate Arts Action Group of the KBN Climate Coalition. We're actually one of 6 different action groups of the coalition. It includes carbon sequestration, community building and education, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and vision, policy, and legislation. The Climate Arts Group, which was actually started in September of 2019, calls artists of all kinds, not just visual artists, to consider how to use their craft to help people think about the environment and climate change. Art engages people's hearts and minds. Art helps us take action on the climate crisis, impacting Cape Ann and the rest of the planet. So our Climate Arts Group is fortunate to count Mayor Safatia Thakin among our members. And tonight I want to both welcome and thank our mayor for being part of this webinar.
Thanks, Susan. So the theme tonight, this afternoon, and thank you all for sacrificing a couple of, sacrificing time on this beautiful afternoon. But the theme that is with us today is can art help change how society thinks about climate change and about the environment? So the flow of this hour is simply that we're going to see the video produced by Lisa, and then we're going to have a panel of 3 people speak to us about the climate and about the environment. And the first one of those people is going to be Amy Brower, who is a senior scientist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts, in Falmouth. The second person is Sinikka Nogelo, who is a resident of Gloucester, and I find it difficult to not say that she's a 3-dimensional artist. And the third person is Mags Harries, who is a sculptor and is best described as somebody who works in the area of public art, which is very much what we're going to be dealing with today. So after the 3 panelists react to the film and show a few slides perhaps, then we'll have a Q&A session, which again, we will get questions from the chat box. So I hope you can figure out how to use the chat box. So having said that, I think if we would cue up the video and start that, that would be great.
Elaine MacGray Starrett of Rockport is an artist who began raising the alarm of the harm we are doing to our environment 20 years ago with her series called Without Just Grounds. The series depicts human-sized wildflowers painted with acrylic on canvas, towering over a photo montage of compromised landscapes. We met Elaine at her home, and she talked about her artwork and told us why artists need to raise their voices about the climate crisis. Here on Everything We Do Matters.
I think everybody in the arts has an opportunity to say something with their work about climate change. I decided to start these paintings after I graduated from art school, and I was looking at the conditions that I saw on Cape Ann. I was influenced by a journalist in the Gloucester Daily Times. His name is Jim Munn, who put the idea in my head of think globally and act locally. He was writing about Cape Ann and how it needed more protection. Then I drove around myself and noticed examples of neglect and really thoughtless actions that I knew jeopardized our immediate environment here. I recorded them in a provocative way with photo collage, a way that might cause a viewer to look more closely at the situation. I lived across the street from Doctor's Run. That beautiful hill where the doctors used to travel in order to reach their patients on the other side of the Cape was stripped of its trees, and huge houses were put up in there, and I'm happy for the people who live there. I'm sure there's a wonderful view, but I did miss that forest. When I had that experience, I made a painting of wildflowers that would be likely to grow there. On the way, I used to walk up there and see them on the way to the quarry, which of course was no longer available to us. And that's what was happening in Rockport and in Gloucester that I saw. Whole hillsides of trees were being wiped out in order to make room for something commercial or large homes. I decided to use wildflowers, who are very small and they're very innocent and they go unacknowledged very often, but they're part of our environment. I hope people will look at the artwork and see something that they might be able to do, is pointing out the situations on Cape Ann of devastation. And I have the wildflowers watching in the painting while you react to the presented situation of devastation. Climate change is with us, and it's going to increase unless we take some radical actions. And after years of thoughtless human encroachment here on Cape Ann, that's a quote from the journalist Jim Munn. I decided I couldn't really personally propose laws and pass them or punish people for wrongdoing, but I could try to raise the awareness of the impact of human encroachment. The way we treat our local environment does affect its good health and ours. We can choose to contribute in a negative way by making poor, often selfish choices. But if the insults to the Cape Ann environment go unchecked, we need to ask, how will this affect the ocean, the rivers, and the marshes we love, and as a result, our climate? I think where the government comes to work in this is looking at our own towns and their zoning laws. Our local laws affect the environment through local land use, such as excessive tree removal, because trees sequester carbon. And then there's the loss of wildlife habitat that contributes to climate change. The loss of recreational areas is a quality of life issue. Increased asphalt means more water runoff, losing groundwater and drinking water, and it's no help to the ocean. We know that more roads means more cars and more pollution. And it's such a small island for such large houses that are being built. So we need some protection from that. I think artists are in a position to change attitudes. And I think the attitudes are too well established, to just go your own way and do your own thing. And the artist can reach people emotionally. I would like to see more artists take a stand on the climate and the environment. We know that everything in nature is connected. So artists can inspire others with photography, visual evidence, music, songs, a horror story. They are not hard to find in the changes to our oceans, for example. So we could create attention to young people, involve them, sponsor a play, or a musical, or a puppet show for the young, showing what they can do for their home, the Earth.
That was the video from Lisa Smith of Elaine MacGray Starrett. I had a chance to interview Elaine last August, and one of my favorite quotes from her was that artists have a responsibility. I can do beautiful. Any artist can do beautiful, but I want to have it give you a punch in the stomach. And I think these pictures do that really very subtly. When you see them, they're very tall panels. When you see them, they look very nice. And then you look at the photo montage that she does at the bottom, and that's where you get the kick in the stomach. Anyway, I had to say that. Today we have three panelists, as I have said. And we're going to start with Amy Bauer, who is the daughter of Elaine, and she was inspired by her mother to become a marine biologist, a marine scientist, I should say. So now, having said that, I'm going to turn the how should I say it? Turn the screen over to Amy Bauer.
Thank you, Axel. Thank you very much, Axel, for the introduction. And I have to start by saying how honored I am to be a member of this panel. My mother was intended to be one of the panelists for this premiere. And I am really thrilled. Well, I'm thrilled to be able to be here in her stead. Although I'm obviously extremely sad that it can't be her. I'd also like to acknowledge some other family members that are attending. My brothers, Charles Starrett and Tom Bauer, as well as my sister, Jo Bauer, are also in the audience here today. And I also would like to thank all my mother's friends, close friends from KBN, and as well as her art colleagues for also taking part today. And again, it's an honor to share the panel with Mags and Sinikka, who are distinguished artists. As long as I can remember growing up, my mother cared deeply about the natural world. Some of my favorite memories from growing up in Rockport include fishing from her KBN dory named Jolly, picnics at Andrews Point and Halibut Point, trips to the Ipswich River Wildlife Sanctuary. That was a real favorite for me. And summer vacations in the woods of Maine. Rachel Carson was definitely a hero in our family. And we as a family joined the environmental movement of the 1970s by first, what I remember specifically, a maximum recycling effort in our household with cans, bottles, and newspapers. And I remember helping my parents cart them to the dump, which is now called a transfer station, for recycling. All those childhood experiences were very influential in my choice of study and career. I have chosen an academic career in studying ocean currents around the world. And I've also developed from my mother as well a concern for our climate and how it's changing. There's no doubt now among scientists and many of the public as well that our planet is warming, and a good fraction of this warming is caused by humans burning fossil fuels and putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which traps the heat on Earth. Some of the global consequences of that warming on the oceans and the cryosphere are shown in this slide. There are starting already and going to continue increases in the permafrost temperature, marine heat waves, which are just like what it's described, like atmospheric, weather heat waves. They're happening in the ocean as well. There's extreme heating events in certain regions of the oceans. The ocean heat content is increasing as well. In fact, 93% of the excess heat that's being trapped by greenhouse gases is actually going into the oceans. Sea level is also rising, and that is one of the most predictable outcomes of global warming that we can expect now and into the future. We're seeing and going to continue to see decreases in ice sheet mass, decreases in dissolved oxygen, and decrease in the pH of the ocean, which is an increase in the acidity of the ocean, which affects how microscopic marine organisms can build shells. Also decreases in sea ice and glacier mass and snow cover. And with all that melting ice and snow, a lot of fresh water is going into the ocean. These changes, many of them are in turn going to change the what we call the circulation of the oceans, or ocean currents. If I could have slide 3, please. Just as there are giant wind systems on Earth, you've probably heard about the jet stream, for example. There are massive ocean currents that fill the ocean basins. And one of the most prominent amongst these, really globally, is the Gulf Stream, which is located pretty close to, very close to the east coast of the US, and not that far from Cape Ann, in fact. What you're seeing in this animation, hopefully, is ocean currents are in white and ocean surface temperature in the colors. And the Gulf Stream is flowing northward and then northeastward up the east coast of the US. And with it, it carries very warm tropical waters. And these warm waters directly impact the climate of the eastern US and Europe, in not just the average air temperature, but also the storm tracks and storm intensity. You may have seen some news in the press recently. There have been articles in the last few weeks in the New York Times and in the Washington Post about some scientific findings indicating that perhaps the Gulf Stream is slowing down. Now, me as a scientist, I'm quite convinced that it has slowed down slightly over the last millennium, last 1,000 years. It's hard to tell over a period of just several decades, which is all our entire instrumental record, whether it's slowing down. It probably is slowing down slowly. It's hard to detect over the last few years and decades, but if it isn't, it's going to, or the 1,000-year trend is going to continue. And this is all a direct result of the human-induced global warming. Now, you may have seen a Hollywood movie called The Day After Tomorrow, where the Gulf Stream and the associated currents that make up the global ocean current system are going to collapse. And in that movie, they collapse like overnight. Okay, that is not realistic. And it may be yet 100 years or so before we really see a sharp we see that a significant slowdown. But in fact, I hesitated with the word significant because any slowdown is important to pay attention to, and we can't be complacent. This is a massive system with a massive amount of inertia. And as it slows down, even just a small amount, it would take an enormous changes to spin it back up again. It's like a flywheel in that way. So this Gulf Stream slowdown, which is probably underway over a long time, slowly, and also the ocean warming that we're seeing is going to have consequences right here locally for storm intensity, sea level rise, ocean ecosystems, and fisheries, all of which are going to have a direct impact on lifestyles, livelihoods, and survival on Cape Ann. If I could go to the last slide, please. This is a schematic diagram that shows how the Gulf Stream in the North Atlantic is connected to a global set of currents that make up what's called sometimes the Great Ocean Conveyor. It was made by some talented graphic artist, probably 20 or 30 years ago. And it's just iconic, both for scientists and the public, because it takes a lot of complicated scientific information and collapses it into a simple diagram that's easy to digest. And it shows how all the oceans and the globe are connected. It's one big system. And the oceans are, in this way, part of the giant climate system for the whole planet. So this kind of graphic evokes an emotion maybe in you. It has in me ever since I first saw it. It's just a sense of wonder and a curiosity about the earth and how it works. And this was my mother's goal with her panels, really, was to evoke an emotional response to environmental degradation on Cape Ann that she was observing. So artistic expression in any form can reach people at an emotional level. And that is sometimes what is really needed for people to take action to turn around the climate crisis. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. That was great and very sobering, and a good introduction to our next panelist. Sinikka, would you like to begin?
Hello, everybody. I was thanking you earlier, saying how I'm so very, very pleased to be here, and that my efforts in addressing the environment led me to a whole new art medium. I'd painted a lot of climate paintings, one of the most recent being the last blizzard, which is the first slide. So the last blizzard is a very large stain painting. Other paintings that I had done were things like ozone versus no zone, BP oil spill, don't get crude on George's Bank, and tundra melt. And then a dozen or so years ago, I heard about the huge gyres in the ocean that went round and round, and soon noticed that the eggs in the supermarket were encased in 3 layers of plastic. At that time, instead of picking up a paintbrush, I picked up plastic, just from my own house, all sorts of things, pop-up meat thermometers, sunglasses, kids' toys. And I took those plastic egg cartons, filled them, and made wall pieces, one of which you can see in the next slide. In making the Kitchen Egg series, I discovered that I treated trash like paint. I separated colors, lights and darks, and composed as I went. I learned that just the sheer mass of the material made a statement, that people's curiosity about the objects and their familiarity made the art very approachable. People pointed out things that were funny or elicited memories. Kids just oohed and ahed. And on a more intellectual level, I took satisfaction in having, in a way, quite coincidentally, created an archaeological record of our culture in a moment of time. And I guess I could talk now, unless you're still looking. And all this when I was making my second start as a professional artist, after I retired from local television. And a friend had a show at the White Ellery House at Grant Circle, a historic building of the KBN Museum, which gave every summer Saturday to a different artist to do a show. I applied and got the opportunity. It was fun and a challenge to hang the show because you couldn't add lights or drive any nails. I put my environmental pieces upstairs, my kitchen egg in the kitchen, and 3 wall pieces made of tin in the front room. But there was an empty wall just crying out for glitz. So I hurried and made my first metallic kitchen egg. Could we please lose the slides for just a second? Because they're coming a little ahead of the rest of my stuff. Now, there were corner cupboards empty in that room. So thinking tin and my Finnish heritage, I called all my siblings and asked them to send me any tiny pieces that they might have left over from New Year's. When we traditionally melt tin, throw it in cold water, and tell fortunes for the coming year from the interesting pieces that form. I lined the cupboards with mirrors so you could see all sides, and they were beautiful and had a history too. Upstairs, there was an intriguing, fragile, empty room in which no one was allowed. It was cordoned off. How tempting. So I very carefully tossed in various items left over from the tin and plastic I'd been using, and voila, I had my first installation, on which I got a compliment. Finally, I had given some thought to the need to have something in the yard so people would know to come in, because this building was ordinarily not open. So with my leftover tin, I made a tin drum animal. It had antlers like the wind turbines that had just come to town, and you could play it because it was tin after all, and it also had a tin drum necklace. Another first, my very first sculpture. So it's no wonder that I think one of the best things you can do for an artist is to provide an opportunity and free rein. It led me into some unexpected, unknown territories I still find very intriguing. So if we have the next slide now, Alexis, my daughter, has been, oops, I guess we missed the 8-foot sculpture, but I had done an 8-foot sculpture of the kitchen egg series. And then I used lots of other materials like you're seeing now, which is shredded paper. This is called shredded in a paperless society. And this is of a tree stump, the actual tree stump with the shredded paper showing there. And in the middle is what the middle of the tree trunk looked like. And I also used plastic pipe and rubber gloves and things like that. And most notably, a 3,000 plus plastic coated hanger piece that you can see in the very next slide. In this piece, which is called All Wired, which was for a Maudsley outdoor sculpture show where the theme was tension. And the next slide, please. And now you can see why this piece upped my fascination with light. Direct sun or deep shade, it's two entirely different pieces. Next slide. But looking down into it from the top was absolutely my favorite view. So the recycling message is still there, and so is abstraction. One might just enjoy the glinting, or think about the pressures of the metal that wants us to spring apart, but it can't. Or how our society is all wired, or hacking, or strong emotions. Perhaps the colors bring to mind pressures of race and gender, in which case, though there's tension there, we're all in it together. We sink or swim together. So let's swim with science and art, and please do make sure you get a membership in any arts organization you want to see there when COVID's over. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sinikka. That was great. And I love your stuff. It does a lot of what we saw in these 8-foot panels. They're beautiful, but then you get a kick in the stomach. Thanks. And now I think we'll move on to Mags Harries with her an interesting story from a person with many interesting stories about encouraging dialogue, but more than that, encouraging dialogue that leads to action. And that's what we're talking about here. We realize that we're in this audience today, that we're not speaking only to artists, but we're speaking to the general public. But when you hear what she has to say, I think you'll see the relevance and the intersection of art and society. So I'll switch it over to Mags.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I've been an environmental artist since the 70s, making global trash drawings and basically working in galleries and really finding that I really didn't get too much dialogue around my pieces. I got a lot of dialogue when I did public art. People had a lot of opinions about my work and were quite vocal about saying them. And that was really kind of wonderful. So I've been doing public art now for 40 years. And the last 30, I worked with my husband on Laosheda on large scale projects. One of them a hydropower station in Phoenix, Arizona, another big solar complex in Austin called Sunflowers. And, you know, one of the interesting things about working in the public realm is trying to get people to think larger and in a much more environmental way. And that's always been a challenge, and it's been one of our successes of our practice. So the last few years, I've gone back into the galleries and dealing with the idea of global warming. And so a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I wanted to go to the Arctic and see the glaciers. I wanted to experience them myself. And so out of it came a series of pieces which are iceberg pieces. So can you show them, Larry? And contrary to Elaine's pieces, which are 6 foot high and quite wonderful in the sense of incorporating your body as the same size as the images, these are tiny. They're 6 by 7 by 5 inches, very intimate pieces. And what I was really trying to do in these pieces is put the horizon level at the water level so that when you look on the top of it, you see one thing, and when you look below, you see another thing. So they become metaphors for many, many things. And obviously this is in the Trumpian era too. So anyway, there were 13 of these pieces in the show. And just before the show, I said, you know, maybe this isn't enough. I'm going to bring back a piece I did in 2008. And so, and this piece, if you can go to it, Larry. This piece called the One-Legged Table. What I did, I had an idea that I could make a table out of multiple tables and that each table would only stand on one leg. So they couldn't stand at all unless they stood with the other tables. So you can see how I cut them up here. Can you go to the next one? These are all the one legs under the table that are holding this whole thing up. Next one. And this is the final table. So all these came out of people's kitchens. They came out of Craigslist. They came out of Harvard University recycling. All the chairs on the walls were, during the snowstorm, people put out chairs to save their parking space. I steal them and I painted them all. And so when you came in to an event here at the table, you could choose your chair. So that was a kind of important thing in terms of placing you in the space, that you chose your chair, you sat at the table wherever. And so can you show the next one? So there were 3 themes I decided to address. What this one was broken, fix, and reuse. And I made a tagine out of winter vegetables because that was what was appropriate to eat in New England at that time, because they're all root vegetables. So out of this, I said to each person, you have to think about actions that are really doable. And so one of the things I should have said, that everyone that came was from a different discipline. And in some of the other lunches, I had a teenager, I had a kindergartner, I had an 80-year-old, and they were all from different professions. One was a psychologist, another was maybe an artist, another was a gardener. And so, for each person coming to the table, they could bring different perspectives into it. So on the left, there's Clara Wainwright, who is a well-known artist who lives in Gloucester and Cambridge. Next one. So this one was its water use and abuse, and it focused on the Charles River. And so a lot of history came up, a lot of ideas of how you treat a riverbank, what kind of plants you should plant, thinking about ways to engage the river, not just in the spot that you're at, but in the whole kind of length of the river was an important thing to think about. And the third one, can you go to the next one? This was the garden, food, and community. And so, this was, again, really interesting in that we had professors from Tufts University, we had a farmer, we had Lara Laponica from Gloucester, and, there's a kindergartner who talked about recycling in her school. And, out of this, and we took a lot of notes, came real ideas. And what's so interesting about bringing different people together is the different perspectives, and they have different skills. Actually, the guy on the left there, he decided this table was so great that he was going to take it up and carry on these luncheon traditions at his residency up in New Hampshire. So, I think food is a really great way of getting people together and really thinking about, okay, as one person, maybe you can't make change, but you can certainly make change if you bring a group of people together. And even though the whole group might not be willing to participate, 3 or 4 or 5 might be able to participate and really get things going. So, I think the sense is that if you are doing work, it's really good to get experts in to talk about things. I mean, I think it was so amazing, Amy, giving us this whole information about ocean warming. I mean, that is quite fabulous for an artist to work with someone like Amy, but you can also work with a farmer. We all have our perspectives of how things might change and how we can bring people together. So I suggest that we could maybe carry on some of this conversation further after today. So can you go to the next slide? Yeah. Basically, I said all of that, but brainstorming actions that could be immediately addressed is really, really important. Doing it, small actions can become big actions. So anyway, what are the topics that you want to address? So thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Mags. That was great. And now we have just a couple of questions that we're going to try to ask the group. And if you could, Larry, put spotlight all three of our speakers, that would be great.
Oops.
So great. I love all this technical production. There we are. And it's amazing. So thanks a lot. I mean, this is really, I love the way that this finished off with the going beyond the usual thing that a lot of people talk about when they talk about can art change society, into getting about that it's beyond the intersection of artists and scientists. It's really about the intersection of people coming together to talk about things. And Mags, you talked about food was the great centering piece to get people to talk about this kind of thing. The question that I would ask all of you at this point is, how do we push this conversation, this attempted dialogue, how do we push it to action? I think there's, you know, the research that I've done in the last few months, there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of published stuff. How do we push it to action? I'm just going to throw that back.
I think you started it by starting this wonderful group of which I knew nothing until you invited me.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's this getting people, assembling people together to get things going. And that final push into action is the question. Mags, you said something to me the other day about that sort of transition, and you said that one of the rules that you had in the brainstorming was that people had to come to actionable kinds of things, doable kinds of things.
Mhm.
You...
And yeah, and it's really, I do it with my students a lot, and I've done a lot of public pieces with them. And brainstorming and saying no idea is a bad idea. We write it down. We don't judge it. I mean, it might be a bad idea, but we don't judge it. And so once you write it down and everybody has had that conversation, then things rise to the top. And those things that rise to the top start to be part of, you know, everyone has felt ownership of it. And then, you know, one of the things that's really interesting too, in a group, people have different skills. There might be a good manager, there might be a good graphic person, there might be a good maker, there might be a good connector, you know. And so everybody has these skills, and you can make things happen by having everybody focused on one thing. And you know, it comes together. It comes together so well if one does that. But you know, I guess I don't feed my students. I have them in a class, but I think food and drink and around a table is an amazing way to get the conversation going, or the ideas going, with a moderator. One has to have a moderator, otherwise it gets into chit chat pretty fast. But, anyway, that's my experience.
Yeah. So, Amy, you have obviously been talking to a lot of your colleagues inside and outside the scientific community about this, and I know that the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution has been doing that as well. What
Mhm.
what do you have to say about the action component? I can imagine that at the very elevated heights of world-renowned institutions like that, that's an issue that you address from time to time.
Yes, certainly. At Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and other similar research organizations, our primary goal is to discover and expose the facts about how the Earth works and how the climate is changing. We don't always get ourselves into advocacy. Certainly as citizens and individuals, we may, but as an organization, we feel our role is to provide the truth about and speak the truth about what's going on, to provide the information that policymakers and citizens need to make the right decisions going down the line. So it's we toy with that line between advocacy, because some feel no, that scientists should be more advocates, and others feel no, we need to maintain our feet on the ground with just the facts. You know, it's a very interesting tension there. But I think we all agree that the information that we're discovering about the oceans, the atmosphere, and the climate are most useful to inform the public and policymakers and governments and citizens.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that's interesting, you mentioned the two articles last week in the New York Times, and we have the luxury of the digital version of the New York Times. So some of these graphics were in there, and the graphics are really very impressive because they take all of your and your colleagues' research and put it into a position into a place where people can understand it.
Mm-hmm.
It's about getting, I think, conversely, it's also, and maybe Sinikka, you could talk about this, about getting the policymakers at the table with the artists.
Absolutely. Also, the scientists, it's learning about science that has inspired all we artists. If we hadn't learned the science, we wouldn't have made the art. So that's really key, to have the scientists. And I must applaud Lisa Smith's video that you guys had. You know, I spent so much time in public access television, as did Lisa. And this is exactly the kind of thing we always desired to have happen and tried to help have happen, that people would make shows that others would watch. So I would love to see us at Mags Harries' table, all together talking very informally, have community times and spaces where you could do that, have scheduled times where anybody who wants to make a video can do that, and we will listen and listen and learn. And you know, also the exhibit spaces use our, like the gifts that the KBN Museum gave me when I had not been showing again, and it was such a great experience. We've got places and organizations that can give kind of opportunities to artists. So it's endless, and this group that you've started is so inspirational.
Great, thanks. So Gail Seavey asked the question, Amy, directed at Amy. Amy, do you know scientists who would like to work with some of the artists here on KBN?
Yes, in fact, I was just going to bring that up. There are a number of programs cropping up now, pairing together scientists with artists, with many artistic expressions in many forms, whether it's sculpture or dance or music or visual arts, painting. And I know of a few, and I could even, if someone wanted to contact me, I could try to start putting some folks together and see what we could do. I have a colleague in particular at Woods Hole who's very involved in that kind of partnering. And he's running a program called Synergy, along with others, which is exactly that. So there are some formal programs, and but I'd also be happy to try to put some partnerships together as well.
This is probably the right moment for me to mention that the KBN Climate Coalition has a website under that name, KBN Climate Coalition, and should anybody who's in this group now wish to get in touch with Amy, they can go to the KBN Climate Coalition website and hit the contact and ask for information through that. So the other part of this that is of interest is the fact that there are local institutions. The Peabody and Essex Museum is, I guess, in April, if I'm not incorrect, starting a whole series of things on action on the environment, with the emphasis on the action part. There's a comment here that from Mr. Charles Starrett. It says, on the topic of moving to action, I encourage those interested to look into the work of the Presencing Institute, which is associated with MIT. And I'm certainly, and my wife and I are certainly associated with that, or acquainted with it. They actively develop frameworks and methodologies for systems change, which have been applied to climate change, among other global challenges. You can find that link in the chat box here. And I should remind all of you that once you're in the chat box, there is this little 3-dot box that should allow you to save the contents of the chat, and it will magically appear on your computer as a text document. So these links and the information that's in the text box will be there for you to use later. We have from Matthew Morris, one action we can do is contact Governor Baker to sign the next generation climate bill, which will be the most impactful climate bill by any state ever. So that's interesting. And from Karen Restubin, we have Synergy, was a wonderful collaboration between Woods Hole, 8 artists, and the Museum of Science several years ago. Glad to hear it's still active. So there's also, well, we've got a lot of information in here. I'm going to, in the spirit of moving to action, since it's now 4 minutes past 6, I'm going to do something that may not be popular with everybody here, but I'm going to start to perhaps say thank you to our panel and to all of the people who have put this together, and make some very slow moves to going to the less formal part of this whole thing into breakout rooms. I'd first of all like to thank our 3 panelists for having contributed to this conversation. The lead up to the conversation was itself really great. And obviously this whole thing would not have been possible without you being part of this, and without Lisa Smith's great work in doing the video. And I'd also, it's incumbent on me to thank the KBN Climate Coalition for having let us use their Zoom link, and for Larry Childs for having how should we say, with a bunch of amateurs like ourselves having made this whole production possible.